Welcome everybody to the OMA membership meeting. It's good to see you all again in person. First thing on the agenda is the consent calendar. I need a motion to approve the consent calendar consisting of the minutes of the October 20th, 2021 annual membership meeting and financial report. Okay, it was moved by Henry Balanceifer and seconded by Jim Trent. Is there any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay. Just for information, we have the upcoming summer conference and board schedules. The 2023 OMA Summer Conference will be held at Hood River, August 10th through the 12th. The 2023 OMA Board of Directors meeting is scheduled, also includes the packet for the membership information. The OMA 2024 Summer Conference will be held in Klamath Falls, July 18th through the 20th. And staff will be issuing RFPs to find locations for the 2025 and 2026 conferences later this month. That brings us to the election of officers and directors for 2023. I'd like to thank the following members for the nominating committee. Mayor Beth Witowski she was the past president and chaired this. Mayor Brian Dalton, Mayor Keith Mays, Mayor Tammy Kaufman, and Mayor Michael Prieden. And I'm going to turn it over to Mayor Witowski to introduce the slate for next year's board members.
I don't know that this is on. Tap or a touch. There we go. Good morning, everybody. First of all, I owe Mayor Dalton a thank you because I was quite late to our final nominating meeting for this slate as a result of having some other meetings, and he took the reins and made sure he reviewed all the points and did an excellent job so that when I got there, I just kind of nodded on the Zoom and confirmed the excellent decisions my colleagues had made. We had some really strong applications this year. It was a competitive and rigorous discussion, but we did select Mayor Rod Cross as our president-elect, as well as Mayor Mays and Mayor Jones from the Dalles and Philomath, respectively, which will give us some great regional representation and diversity on our board if accepted by you fine folks this morning.
So I move for a motion to approve the slate for the candidates for 2023. So it's moved by John McCardle and seconded by Carol and Henry. Is there any discussion? Mr. Truex.
Keith is leaving the office of mayor at the end of this year.
I'm sorry,
It's Rich Mays.
I should have used first names as well. Rich Mays.
Okay. So, is there any more discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay. Congratulations to those appointed. So now I want to recognition of outgoing mayors for the OMA board. And so I'd like to call Beth Witowski and Jason Snyder up. It's really nice to work with a good board, and we've all became really good friends, and I'm going to miss being on the board with them, but I'm still going to be friends with them, and that's the good thing. Are we doing pictures? I'd also like to take an opportunity to recognize some past presidents of the OMA that will be retiring at the end of this year. please stand. George Endicott, Beth Witowski, and Scott Berg. I'm gonna miss you guys for not being here next year, but past presidents will still be at the mayor's conferences, I'm sure. So good. Thank you. I'd also just like to take an opportunity. I know there are several mayors in here that are going to be retiring at the end of this year as well, and a lot of them became friends of mine. I know Joe Henry's stepping down after this one. Anybody else, feel free to stand or raise your hand. See, I need to call up Mayor Linehan.
Good morning, everyone. I am here to recognize Mayor Gowing for his service, and I had a few words. Mayor Gowing is serving his third term as mayor in the city of Cottage Grove. He was originally elected as mayor in 2016, and his public service with the city and the city council started in 2009. Mayor Gowing was born and raised in Cottage Grove. He's raised his family. He's a fourth generation graduate of Cottage Grove High School, and he is also a U.S. Army veteran and an active member of the American Legion. Thank you for your service. You have humbly served on the OMA board, and you helped bring us together as a group to find our purpose. Your common sense approach to leadership is something that is greatly missing in today's politics. I admire your fierce advocacy for our military veterans, the homeless, the union workers, and your fellow mayors and constituents. Your word is your bond, and you treat others with respect, and they give it back to you. You might not be the only mayor who rides a Harley, but I'm told you might be the only mayor in history who rides a Harley in a parade in a toga. Thank you for your leadership, and thank you for your friendship.
So that concludes our membership meeting, and so we will be adjourned at, looks like about 8:39. Brings us into our OMA workshop. It is my honor to introduce today's speaker, Liz Schroeder. Ms. Schroeder is an associate professor of economics in the School of Public Policy at Oregon State University. She studies political media communication, behavior bias in decision-making, and effects on public policies. Recent work has examined the impact of partisans and media on the voters' political knowledge, as well as the effects of the current events, social movements on elected officials, and social media and official communications. Please give Professor Schroeder a warm welcome.
Okay, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here today. I was really excited to hear that this group wanted to talk about misinformation because I think we all know it's a growing problem in our country and around the world. We're really living through a crisis of misinformation, and I think local government and local officials are really the best place to start at fighting it. Also, I chose a presentation template that's very OSU orange forward, so I hope that I didn't. I'm not really practicing what I'm preaching about trying not to be polarizing, but this is where we are. Okay, thank you. Okay. So I want to divide our time together today into two parts. The first is just to think about what is happening in our world right now. Why are we seeing this rise in misinformation? What makes people susceptible to believing misinformation? How do polarization, group identity, social media, the news landscape play a role? So I'll talk for a little bit. I'll go through some slides, then we'll break into discussion groups at our tables, talk about what's going on in your communities, come back together, recap that, look for common themes. Then we'll take a break. Then we'll go to part 2, which is about what we can do about it. What are the best practices for fighting misinformation, and how we can apply those locally. And please feel free to stop me anytime if you have a question. Okay, so misinformation is a growing problem. It can be certainly dangerous if people have the wrong information about public health. It can affect health outcomes. If people are just generally confused and misinformed, it can harm the functioning of government. So we want to think about why it's happening. Let's start by trying to define what is misinformation. So I'm going to start by saying it's false or misleading information masquerading as legitimate news. But that can take a lot of forms. Sometimes misinformation is true. Maybe it's outdated. Maybe it applies to a different location. People are sharing it in good faith. They really think that it's true, and it just happens to be misinformation. Sometimes misinformation is technically true, but it's still misleading because people are cherry picking. They're only sharing half-truths. They're not giving all the information. And then disinformation is intentional misinformation. This is when people, for whatever reason, are intentionally spreading misinformation for their own ends. And finally, misinformation can even be acquired through things that are purely fictional. So even if you read something and you know it's not true, and you accept that it's not true, later on it can still affect how you're thinking about things. Okay, so the first thing to mention is that misinformation is certainly not new. So this is an image from a famous series of articles in the New York Sun in 1835 that claimed that an astronomer had looked through a telescope and discovered a colony of bat people who were living on the moon. This was a sensation. The circulation of the New York Sun doubled. This really established the Sun as one of the leading and most important newspapers. But as the rest of the century went on, we started to see more of a backlash towards this type of journalism. People started to really value credibility, being able to trust the facts in the news. And so the sort of leading newspapers and news organizations became more focused on facts. Misinformation became less profitable.
How long did it take to get that debunked?
A long time, because the only way to communicate about it was letters. So I think they ran a whole series of articles, and it took months before somebody could contact this guy. And he did have a telescope that he was looking at the moon with. I think he was in Australia. And yeah, but in the meantime, they made a fortune, right? So they weren't necessarily sorry. Maybe some of us wish misinformation could be this fun now. Okay, so misinformation is not new, but what is new is just the amount of it. We're deluged with misinformation and the speed with which it travels. And I want to highlight 2 reasons that that is happening. One is fragmented and polarized news landscape, so where we're getting our information. And then I also want to talk a little bit about the role of social media. I think some of us are more or less involved in social media, but it's important to understand how it's working if you want to be able to fight rumors that come from social media. Okay. We can't talk about misinformation without talking about what's happening to local news. So large majorities of Americans trust local sources of information, including local news, the most. 79% of Americans say that local news, they trust it more than national news to get information that they can use in their daily life. They also say that local news organizations are more trusted to report the news without bias and to get the facts right. It is. That is my next slide. And this is exactly the problem, right? So the most trusted source of information for people, especially about what's happening in their communities, is local news. And we're seeing local news, particularly in print, is really in decline. So since 2005, a quarter of the newspapers in the US have closed, and that's predicted to go up to a third by 2025. Ad revenue fell by 80% from 2005 to 2020 for news, so their business model is basically not working anymore. This has led to what people in journalism and communications refer to as news deserts. So this is an area, especially rural areas, that don't have any sources or very few sources of local news. So I looked up some numbers for Oregon. 2 counties have no local newspaper, and 20 counties in Oregon have a local newspaper, but it's only weekly. And among the newspapers in Oregon, circulation has decreased more than 40% since 2005, and it's continuing to get worse. So this leaves us with something of an information vacuum. People trust local news is disappearing, so it's harder to get facts about what's happening in your community, and that leaves a real opportunity for misinformation to come up.
I think the problem's even worse than that, though, because, you know, like in our community, we have 2 newspapers, and the newsrooms have been gutted.
Yes.
And so even though we have 2 newspapers that are counting in your numbers there, they're not really providing much quality news at all.
Absolutely. So a lot of what local newspapers have is like AP feeds or things that are coming from national news sources, and then maybe 1 or 2 local stories. Same thing with local TV. A lot of those are increasingly owned by national corporations. And so national corporations are making the decisions about what to cover in your local areas. So yeah, that's a really good point. Even if you do have a local newspaper, it might not be getting across the information that you would like it to be getting across. Okay. So then the question comes, where are people getting their news, if not from the local newspaper? 86% of US adults now get their news online. And so this can mean a lot of different things. A large portion of that is the websites or apps of actual news organizations, newspapers. The business model has really shifted towards online ad revenue instead of circulation or print advertising for a lot of the national news organizations. However, the one I think is most alarming is 65% of people say they get their news just by Googling it. And 53% of Americans report that they get news often or sometimes from social media. Okay, so what does this mean? Everybody is now getting their news from different sources, right? Depending on what websites I go to, what social media groups I'm in, what I happen to be Googling. We all are now coming to the public discourse with an entirely different set of facts sometimes. This is called selective exposure. And one way that we see this a lot is that people with different political identities choose to get news from sources that already agree with them. This happens online in social media and also in like cable news, for example. So what's the problem there? Now we're creating polarized echo chambers where people are getting different information and then talking to themselves about that information, and we're not really starting out with a shared set of facts. People also report that they find this very challenging. There's a lot of information out there. Suddenly every citizen is in charge of sifting through it, deciding what's true, and that can be hard. So large majorities of Americans say that false news creates confusion and is a big problem for society. Okay, so if people are worried about false information, they know it's out there, they're afraid that they're getting it, why is it that when we see something that's not true, we tend to believe it? And I want to talk about these 2 things specifically because when we start talking about how to debunk false information, These are the most important things that we need to keep in mind. So people have certain behavioral biases that make us more likely to want to believe certain things or make certain things sound more true to us. And this is really fed into by our identity, the groups that we identify with, and then also just by familiarity, what we hear repeated over and over. So when we get to the part about debunking, we want to focus on these two issues. Okay, so these are two really common behavioral biases that you have probably heard of before, if not by name, just by people talking about them. The first is called confirmation bias. So this is an automatic tendency to notice data that already fits with what we believe. So if I really believe that taxes and fees in my city are too high, every time I hear about something going up, I think, aha, that just goes to show I was right, and I remember that. If I see something about a tax cut or a fee that stays the same, I'm less likely to remember that or retain that information. Motivated reasoning is related. This is a tendency to scrutinize data more carefully if we don't like them than if we do. So if you hear a rumor that your local mayor is corrupt and embezzling money, if that's somebody that you like, then you're likely to say, well, okay, hold on, let me get the facts. There's probably two sides. Let me try to read another news source about it. But if it confirms what you already thought, then you just instantly say, oh yeah, that checks out. Like, I believe that. And so when we're exposed to things, we're a lot more critical of them if they challenge what we already believe. Okay, there's lots of different types of group identities that can come into play. I just want to briefly talk about one that I think we hear a lot about, which is the rise of polarization of political parties in this country. So this is showing just from 2016 to 2022, the growing share of both Republicans and Democrats who say that people in the other party are closed-minded, dishonest, immoral, unintelligent, or lazy. So this is not the kind of polarization where we disagree about the issues, right? Issue polarization would be, if I know your party, then I can predict very well what your policy positions are going to be, and there's not a lot of overlap. This is called affective polarization. This is just, I don't like the other guy. And this is, I mean, you can see skyrocketed. The percentage of people who say 4 or more of these statements are true has increased 75 to almost 100% since 2016. This is particularly dangerous because it also affects how we analyze data. Do you have a question?
Well, I just see the algorithm predict what I want to see.
Yes.
And so this divide is going to get nothing but worse.
Exactly. So I'm going to talk about the algorithm next. This is not, it drives misinformation and what the algorithms show you, and then those feed exactly back into it, right? And so exactly this point, this makes us more likely to think that someone in the other party disagrees with us for a bad reason. They disagree with us because they're selfish. They disagree with us because they don't care, right? Instead of thinking that's a good person that I can relate to and we just differ about the best way to do this, the more we feel this kind of polarization, the more likely we are to attribute what they're doing to something bad. Yes?
Doesn't that, for me, it falls down to emotional intelligence as well. When somebody attacks me, I give them my phone number to accompany my questions.
Yeah.
So I think the reaction to go away from each other is what people want, or what some folks want. For me, it's like, I need to get to know this person. Here's my phone number, let's have a conversation.
Yeah, and I think that's perfect. I mean, so the comment was, sorry, I'm supposed to be repeating the questions for the recording. Yeah, so if someone hears misinformation about you or disagrees with you, one solution is to give them your phone number and talk it out, because it's true that people are trying to drive us apart. This is profitable for some people, social media companies among them. And so I think the more we can do to fight against that, the better. And part of what we're going to talk about for debunking false information is just the idea of trying to educate people and trying to have a consistent, trustworthy stream of information all the time. right? Which I think is exactly what you're talking about. So that when misinformation comes up, they know they can talk to you, they know that you're a good guy, and they feel like less likely to experience one of those biases where they just instantly believe it. Okay, so I brought a couple of studies that might distress you to make this point. The first was a study about mask mandates that was conducted about 9 months into the pandemic. And it found that people were generally very confused about if they did have a mask mandate or if they didn't in their local area, who was responsible for that. Was it their mayor? Was it their governor? In some spaces, was it federal? Right? And it's understandable that people were confused. There's a real patchwork of policies in place at that time. But what it found, this study found, was that if people opposed the policy in their area, whether they opposed a mask mandate or they opposed not having one, if they were against it, then they thought it was the policy of whoever in their chain of government was the opposite party from them. Okay? So if they were a Democrat and their mayor was a Republican, then they would blame that person. If they were a Republican and their mayor was a Republican, but the governor is a Democrat, then they blame the Democrat, right? So it's whoever is not in their party, they assume must be the one doing this to them. And this is an example of both of these biases, right? One is if I hear information that fits with what I believe, I'm more likely to remember it and act upon it. So I'm sure at some point these people did see in the news who was in charge of their mask mandate, but they only remembered it if it agreed with what they already thought, right? And similarly, they only interrogated that information, they only tried to find out more about it if it fit in with what they already wanted to believe. Otherwise, they just happily believed their misinformation. Another series of experiments found that when people believe that a service provided to them is low quality, they are more likely to assume it's provided by the government. And I told you these are upsetting. And when a program or service is high quality, they're more likely to assume that it's privately provided. So again, if they just see something that's not working and they already think that government doesn't work very well, then they think, well, that just confirms what I always thought, right? Same thing for private companies. Okay, so people's belief about local government, what it's doing and how well it's working, really fall prey to both of these behavioral biases. Okay. The other bad news for us is that social media is basically exactly designed to take advantage of and exacerbate these wrong ways of thinking. So we talked about how many people get their news from social media. Here's another survey that found about 1 in 5 US adults say they get their political news primarily through social media. Yes?
So back on the previous slide,
Yeah.
you had mentioned that sometimes they blame somebody else, and then all of a sudden there's an official proclamation, say from the governor or whatnot. How do people get that information? Where do they get the, say, the press conference from the governor or information from the city official?
So this is exactly the problem, right? If there is a proclamation from the governor, Governor of Oregon is changing the mask mandate, that information is available, and the question is, where do people get it? And the answer is sometimes they do and sometimes they don't, right? If everybody is getting information from different places, then we don't all necessarily know the facts. If people are getting political news from social media, instead of having the gatekeepers of local news be editors and publishers of local newspapers, now it's anyone. Completely democratized, which in many ways is fantastic, but it also means that anyone can put anything out there. So if the social media that you follow says, look, the governor of Oregon extended the mask mandate, then you would find out. If you didn't see that information, then you wouldn't know. Right? So in the second part of today, I want to talk about some strategies for people in this room of how to effectively get that information out there, including the question of whether you might want to use social media. Okay. So I want to talk about the two factors that are feeding into biases, the first of which is identity. Studies find that we tend to share information on social media because it connects us with others. Right? So people use social media to sort of recreate or get this feeling of community that they might not be getting as much in other places in our lives as we used to. People don't necessarily want to intentionally share misinformation, and some people do, but a lot of people don't. But if they see something that they think their group would like to hear, they'll share it because it's interesting if it's true, right? Or I'm just asking questions, somebody should get to the bottom of this. And in doing so, you're not necessarily trying to be a local journalist, you're trying to mark your identity, right? I'm a person who cares about this, I contribute to this Facebook group, and we all talk about this thing, and I saw something about it. We also tend to trust people when we feel like they're on our side. That's called affective trust. Cognitive trust is like a logical, I trust someone who's an expert. Affective trust is this person gets me, this person wants the best for me, I trust them as a source of information. So social media really emphasizes that, because if you're in a group for whatever your identity group is, you're going to trust the information that you see from that group, sometimes more than from a more traditionally credible source. Right? And then replying to, interacting with these posts is a way to strengthen group identity. So there are studies about how if you have a belief and then you go into a room full of people who have that belief more strongly and talk about it, it pulls you in that direction, right? So you can become more extreme just by being in a group who believes that thing. The same thing happens online. So people are sharing stories to mark their identity, they're replying, they're interacting with those stories as a way of strengthening that group identity, and that can pull us into more polarized positions or make us more likely to believe something that didn't start out true, but we just kept seeing it maybe in one of our social media groups. Okay. The other problem, so this is factor number 2, which is repetition and familiarity, is that misinformation can be very sticky, meaning once you hear it, you don't unlearn it very easily. If you hear it over and over, this leads to what's called the illusory truth effect. So we tend to believe things, even if they're false, if they're repeated often enough. This is true even if it's discredited. So you hear a rumor over and over again. This bullet point says people are more inclined to pass along a rumor if they've heard it 2 or 3 times. So you've heard something a few times, you pass it along, everyone's talking about it, then it gets debunked. You might understand intellectually that that thing's not true, the source was not credible, but some part of you, if you're asked a related but different question, is still likely to hang on to that fact. Another thing that's bad news for us is that corrective information doesn't get the same level of attention as the original misinformation. So you hear a rumor a bunch of times, you hear the correction once, okay, fine, you move on, but that rumor is still the thing that's stuck in your mind. Nope. Sorry. We'll get a little recap. Okay. I hope that's because it's been fascinating and not because I'm going too fast. Okay, good. Okay, so misinformation is sticky. If we hear something too many times, it stays in our brain. And then this is a comment that got brought up earlier, is that social media is fully designed to exploit this. Social media makes money the longer you stay on the platform. So if you stay on Facebook for a long time or Twitter for a long time, you see more ads, they collect more data about you, and that's how they make their money. So they have algorithms, if you're on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, whatever it is, that determine what shows up for you in your feed. And those favor the kind of posts that get the most engagement. What gets the most engagement? things that make you angry, things that make you afraid, things that make you outraged. Lies and misinformation and conspiracy can be exactly the kinds of things that drive engagement. Because of that, misinformation is shared a lot more often on social media, and it travels much more quickly. One study of Twitter found that false news stories are 70% more likely to be retweeted, so reshared, than true stories, and that they last longer, so they're out there for longer, and they tend to keep cropping up.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
Is it because of your emotional response to it?
Exactly. So the question is this your emotional response? That's exactly right. So I talked about group identity, Democrats and Republicans, but there are lots of other ones. Some of the groups that got the most focus about misinformation in earlier research have been people who play video games and moms. Right? So there are a lot of moms groups on Facebook. That's obviously not a bad identity. That's very important, but it's also very emotional. Right? So if you're going into a Facebook moms group and you see some nice stuff about, tips on sleep training, you might spend 10 or 15 minutes looking at that, and then you're happy and you go on your way. If you go into that mom's Facebook group and you see something scary, some health information that is threatening your baby, people are keeping it from you, right? It's like nobody knows about this, then you start freaking out, understandably, right? And that is the kind of information that keeps you on Facebook. It keeps you looking, clicking at link after link to find out more. You go down a rabbit hole. And so that's much more effective because it triggered that emotional response in you at keeping you on Facebook for longer than just a nice, pleasant, like, here's the best stroller post would do.
What was the first group you said? I just couldn't.
Oh, video game people. People who play video games. Hotbed of misinformation. Yeah. Yeah, those are the two most exciting types of Facebook groups to be in. Yeah, so I don't blame you for hating social media. The more research that I do about it, the more I have deactivated all my accounts, to be honest.
You have to be careful where you click on Facebook. I clicked on Alex for Albany the other day, and I got tons of ads saying Alex for mayor.
Those politicians will get you,
Well, you know what? I look on social media for several reasons because I'm licensed for insurance in 19 states. So I get business from Iowa because of my True Life Financial Solutions page. And several thousand Medicare clients over the pandemic because I was open. So for me, it fed my business and grew my company.
Yeah, so I agree. So the comment is social media can be very effective at growing your company and getting customers. And I think for cities and towns, it can also be very effective. I'm not going to advocate that you shouldn't use it. But I think for those of us who are personally using it, it's like anything. So social media also is shown to be very addictive. When you get a bunch of likes and shares, it triggers the dopamine response in your brain. And so you get that little rush, but you're not actually getting the social interaction that you're craving, so you keep going back and you keep doing more. So I think it's useful to think about it like any kind of drug that can be addictive, right? Like, you know that alcohol can be dangerous, you're still gonna have a drink, but you're gonna do it at a certain time, under certain settings, and limit the amount that you do because you are very well aware of the effects that it can have on you. I think for social media, the same thing. Be aware of your behavioral biases, why something is outraging you before you share it. Okay, so I brought a few examples of misinformation from cities and towns from all over the place, just so we can deconstruct them a little bit. And then we can talk about examples from your own communities. So these two, I think, are in the category of the ones that have gotten the most attention in the news. Misinformation about COVID and misinformation about elections. So the first one is from a Facebook group in Appleton, Wisconsin. that says, everybody talk to your city council members. Tonight, they're going to vote on accepting COVID relief money, and they're going to spend it on contact tracers who are going to put cameras everywhere for surveillance. So they're going to, if you need to be quarantining, they're going to be watching you and seeing if you leave your home and who goes in and all this stuff. Obviously, that's not true, right? But we can think about, a lot of times in misinformation, there is a kernel of truth, or there's a reason that people are worried, right? So it is true that government can misuse your personal information. It is true that there are a lot more cameras everywhere that are keeping track of people. It is true that a lot of people are gathering data on you, right? So when we get to debunking misinformation, we always want to acknowledge, is there a kernel of truth? Is there a reason that people are having an emotional reaction to this? Something people are already worried about, and now they see this, and then they just start sharing it, right? Because it feels true to them because of some things that are true that they're already worried about. The second one is a post about, so it's showing pictures of 2 mail-in ballot envelopes from Colorado, and it says, these are red and blue to identify your political party so that election officials can throw away the votes they don't care about. So this one is tricky because in Colorado, there are different colored envelopes for different reasons by county. So here, sometimes it is by party if there's a primary, right? Sometimes there are different colors based on if they still need to verify someone's ID. But the myth is a lot more simple and easy to understand than the truth. So when we start debunking things, we need to think about how we can try to make the truth as simple and concise and sticky as the lie, which is very intuitive and clear and easy to understand. Okay, but there's lots more misinformation. Yes?
I get the kind of the retweeting and resharing and moms freaking out about something about their baby and all these sorts of things. But like, where does the patient zero, where does the original, like, who is generating these lies in the first place? Lies require intent to manipulate. So like, is that a telephone game? Things kind of build, people share, or is there like Russia's doing like what is? I don't know. I'm just kind of curious. Obviously, there's probably a various group of people, but I'm just curious
Where does it start? So the question is who is yeah, the question is, I understand why if I saw this, I might get really worried and share it. But the question is, who started it, right? Who put this misinformation up to begin with? And I think some of these examples we'll go through a series of different possibilities. Sometimes if it's disinformation, people do it intentionally. And for sure, people can do that for political reasons. Sometimes people just got the wrong idea. I have a funny one in a couple of slides where it was a true story, but the way that people shared it was completely nonsense. So it could be anything. It could be true information that gets misinterpreted. It can be an intentional lie as well. And when we do the debunking, I think it's important to think about that and to express to people, this thing is a myth, and the reason you're seeing it is because of this. It could be the reason you're seeing it is because someone's trying to trick you. Or it could be the reason you're seeing this is, I get it, there's not a lot of information, and this seems like it would make sense. However, it's not true. Okay, so here's one example. I think all of these get to your question. This is the city of Elliott Lake that is combating misinformation, rampant misinformation about playground equipment for autistic children. So they put in some playground equipment that had some sensory aspects to it to be inclusive for kids with disabilities or kids with autism. And then it turns out if you put playground equipment that makes noise in residential neighborhoods, vandals will come and make a bunch of noise at night. So that was a problem, so they had to move it. Yeah, which sounds like a nightmare. But then, right, so people saw the nice playground equipment come, then they saw it leave, and they started, because of whatever behavioral biases or because of what they already believe, thinking that it was somehow nefarious, right? And again, this is the group identity here is parents of kids with special needs. Like there's nothing, polarizing about that. You might be very used to feeling like there's not enough resources ever for your kid. You might be used to feeling like you have to fight for it, right? And so when you see that playground equipment move, you think it's happening again, right? It fits with your worldview and you're not interrogating it. And this is not, again, anyone trying to harm anyone. It's just our natural biases to believe that something is happening for reasons that we already think. Okay, here's some more. So to answer your question, this one is another city in Colorado, where it says Cortez fighting misinformation war over refuse department troubles. So here, the city manager talked to the refuse department about how they're having a budget crisis and some things are gonna have to change. And one of those employees went on Facebook and posted some stuff about how they were getting privatized, everyone's fees were gonna go up. None of that was true, but of course, that was the first thing to get out into the public, right? So I'm sure this person was very legitimately worried about keeping their job. But the city did not have a chance to frame the narrative of what was happening. The first thing out there is this Facebook post that, you know, maybe people believe, oh, of course the government's gonna privatize that, of course they're gonna raise my fees, and they just start sharing, even though it was not true. Another one, City of Dixon to host a town hall meeting in regards to recovery and sober homes to clear up misinformation. Another one says misinformation is being spread about a recent city council meeting where they talked about animal zoning. And this article does say that officials think it's being spread intentionally. So for whatever reason, people want to mislead the public about the animal zoning changes. Okay, and this is the one I said that was sort of funny, not harmful. So Prince Edward Island is in Canada. There was a Canadian news story about how if you pass a school bus illegally, now you could lose your driver's license. Okay, fine. The population of Prince Edward Island is 156,000 people. However, this story got 6 million interactions on Facebook. Okay. Do people care that much about Prince Edward Island? No. People started sharing it into their own, you know, like City of Corvallis Facebook group or whatever other Facebook group they were a part of across Canada, across the US. A Facebook page for school bus drivers shared it. That Facebook page turns out is run out of Ukraine and Vietnam. It's basically just a scam to sell school bus merchandise. Right? But I guess there's a market for everything, right? But people see this come up. Oh, my, you know, Friends of Corvallis Facebook group. Oh, drivers are gonna lose their license if they illegally pass a school bus, and everybody thought it applied to their community. They see the headline. If you clicked on it, you would clearly learn that it was about a small town in Canada. Well, no, a medium-sized city in Canada. But if you didn't click on it, if you just scrolled through, everybody thought it applied to them. So this is an example of true news, but the way that it got shared was misinformation. I don't think anything bad happened from this. Maybe some people thought twice about passing a school bus, so that's fine. But you can see how this could be a real problem if stories or photos or things that don't apply to your community are getting shared and people think they do apply to your community. That can affect elections, that can affect the functioning of government, or that can just cause a lot of distrust if people don't know what's going on. Okay, any questions so far? Okay, so I want to have some discussions with your group at your table. You can choose whatever kind of misinformation you want to talk about. And just I'm going to stay out of that. But talk about what examples of misinformation have come up in your communities. How were they spread? Was it social media? Was it word of mouth? Do you not know? Was it because there was an information vacuum and people didn't know what was happening, or was the information out there and they just weren't getting it or they were ignoring it? Did any group identities get activated, or was there a lot of repetition? And what concerns do you have? So maybe we'll take about 20, 25 minutes for that conversation, and then we'll come back and you can, if you are willing, share out with the group. Yes?
I just had a quick question. Is there been studies on fake profiles? People can make up their own fake profiles and go online and create all kinds of problems.
So So the question is, have there been studies on fake profiles? There have been studies for sure on things like bots that are fake identities on Twitter, and they just do a bunch of stuff. Not that I'm familiar with about making like the school bus association Facebook page. That's not really anyone who has anything to do with school buses. I don't know. I'm not sure if there's anything that we know about how effective that can be to fake your identity. However, based on the research about identity, I would guess that I don't want to teach everyone how to spread misinformation, but it seems like that would be a pretty effective way of doing it. Okay, so let's take 20 minutes or so, chat with each other, and then if you're willing, we'll think about any themes that came up in your group discussion to share back to the group. Okay. If people don't mind wrapping up the table discussions, we can come back together as a larger group. And I put up a few suggested discussion questions, but I'm just interested to know in general if anybody wants to share what came up at their group. Were there any common types of misinformation? So I would imagine people are sitting at tables with people from very different types of communities, possibly, depending on how much sorting you did. But were there commonalities, common sources of misinformation, things that you found hard, or things that you're worried about?
So I think that Mary Pinkelty and I have lots of common ground, common issues, because she shares a lot on social media like I do on Facebook, both of us do. And people are critical of things that are not true. They make these statements of, Mayor's making too much money, well, I don't. They say stuff like, he's caused this problem, and I haven't. And so that's why I use my cell phone number, and I invite people to, sorry.
Oh.
I think I'm hitting the bottom of my reel, so it's not actually pushing it.
Hello.
Ah.
Good evening. So
It is.
people probably you as well, of doing things that we are actually not doing. Or they say, why is she or he focusing on this, and this is the real problem? And I combat that by inviting them out for lunch. I'll see you Friday at my take a break with Mayor Alex, and 9 times out of 10, they do not show up.
Yeah.
But everybody else does. And those are the folks I need to reach. And so I stopped worrying about that person, because they go back to the same feed and go, where the hell were you? And they question that person, and then the person just goes away.
Yeah, so I think, and that's something that I'm going to talk about a little bit in part 2, which is what do you do if someone's obviously being a troll, right? So when do you want to, right, just meaning they're just trying to stir up trouble, they're trying to get attention. When do you respond to them? When do you ignore them? And exactly what you're saying is I think what's true is that you want to show that you're responsive at least, because a lot of other people are seeing that interaction, for sure.
Earlier the better, I think.
And the earlier the better. Yeah, absolutely.
Are you going down the list? Because I could answer all of those.
Yeah,
or just pick
let's
one.
do it. Let's do it.
So I was just thinking, so like the first one was what common types of misinformation come up. Boy, people like to talk about how much they think mayors make a lot. So I'm a non-paid mayor. We get a $23 stipend on the first and second Tuesday, so it's $46 a month.
Outrageous.
So-
Outrageous.
I'm lining my pockets. So, and I'll go ahead and stand because I'm a teacher.
yeah.
That's what I do. So it was interesting. I love the saying where somebody said, let somebody else carry your water. And yesterday I got a message from, and I'm in a pretty heated re-election campaign right now, and I got a message from a friend that says, how much do you make? And so I told her the $46 a month. And she's like, and she was just clarifying the questions. And we were busy. We were here yesterday. And so I didn't get a time to really engage with her. But she's like, and how do we find this information? And where is it in the budget? And blah, blah, blah. And I was like, so I gave her some information and then kind of moved on. Last night as I was going to bed, some light reading on the Nextdoor app, if you've used that one. And I realized why she was asking this question, because somebody was just convinced that I made $80,000 a year. she said, no, anyways, as I read the thread, it was really comical too. But she had shared all that information. So it was great. It didn't have to be me as this person, because whatever I would say would never be good enough for the troll. But that other person, and was able to clarify the information, showed, even after she was showing the budget documents in screenshots on this Nextdoor app, the person said, no, I found this. It says the average mayor in Oregon makes $80,000. Yeah. So even like what you were saying about,
Yep. It could be true, and it wouldn't matter, right?
yeah, that person had made up their mind what they wanted to hear.
Yeah. I think we got one over here.
So, oops, wow, it's loud. Last year, during the COVID fund, my wife and I both contracted it at the same time, and our local neighborhood troll decided she was going to out my wife, which I can handle. This troll can call me out, but calling my wife out, she's a manager of a fairly large retail business in our city, that kind of bothered me. And right after I became mayor, my wife, I had a group of people that were around me that helped me with my campaign. They helped me through our ice storm. And so my wife deemed them the mayor's mafia. And so, it's all in good, and everybody enjoys it in our city. Well, we started making shirts and sweatshirts, and one of the times we donated money from the proceeds to build a skate park in Malal. Anyway, I talked to our printing lady, and she was just kind of flabbergasted that my wife got called out on this. And so she had this great idea. Instead of Karen, the troll's name is Susan, we made a shirt that said, "Don't be a Susan." And in the middle of a council meeting, I had it underneath, probably this shirt even. I just decided it was kind of warm in there, and I unbuttoned the shirt on live council and wore it through the rest of the council meeting. Point of the story, when you have a troll, think outside the box. Don't get, I can get on social media, and I was blasting her and making negative comments toward her and getting frustrated. Think outside the box. I haven't heard a word from her since I started wearing that shirt. And my city council absolutely had a heck of a time during that council meeting, not laughing through the whole thing.
Other groups have something they want to talk about.
I'll share a little bit from our group. We talked about the excellence of our Facebook community groups and how we all have like the city community group and also the real city community group and the no rules community group, and how so much misinformation seems to circulate in those groups. And part of the challenge in combating that is that you may not know everywhere it's appearing and spreading, and so you might have an excellent rebuttal that people go, oh, okay, now we get it, on one thread, but there are 19 other threads where that same accusation is being made. And some of us don't have all day in our parents' basement to refute every single one of those and share the counter arguments and evidence. So, So part of the challenge is that spread. How many places that misinformation is replicated?
I think that's a very common concern. Other groups? Okay, I thought you were gonna be like my college students where the people who sit in the back don't want to talk, but no. We'll go there next. We'll do one here and then go back there.
I thought Mayor Lenahan had oh, you were gonna tell your story? Sorry, I'll start then with your story. This
you gotta get out in front of the
story that Mayor Lenahan told, I thought was like just a classic example of, and that's why I wanted to talk about it if you weren't going to, about where just people made stuff up because they needed to make it make sense. And with that, I'll hand it over to Terry.
Thank you, Jason. So we have about 15 years ago, the city manager that we had had this idea of having all these little pocket parks around town. And we found this one location. It was a wetland area, kind of in a very low-lying area. Ghost Creek kind of runs along it, and it floods all the time. But during that time, it was like, hey, this would be a great place for a park. So we, put structure in there and named it Purple Park because the structure is purple. And the kids actually named it, right? And so the kids hung out there for years, and it was really fun. Well, because it's in a low-lying area and a wetland area, right, it starts to shrink and kept going down and down and down. So about 8 months, 9 months out of the year, it's just flooded. It's always flooded. And so we finally just roped it off. And so Purple Park has been a thorn in the side of the community because, you know, the people who live around that park are always complaining, like, oh, there's nothing here, and they're always complaining and complaining, and the city should do more, the city should do more. Well, this year we decided, and we had engineers come out, we thought, well, we'll backfill it with about 50, you know, like tons and tons of dirt and fill and all that kind of stuff, and decided it was too costly, wasn't the right thing to do, so we went ahead and ripped it down, pulled it out, and then filled some dirt and reseeded it, right? Well, the people in that particular neighborhood, just next to it, they live in the only manufactured park in the community, right? We're a community of about 3,500 people. Well, now the grumble is, one, there's no Purple Park, but now we are disenfranchising the people who live in the manufactured home and not providing you know, park space for kids, right? The city is bad because, you know, they're discriminating against the people who live in the manufactured home area and giving the new people moving into the newer homes and the newer developments, you know, these nice parks, et cetera, et cetera. So we haven't really solved this issue yet. This is an issue we're dealing with, but it's an issue where, because we saw that there was no longer a value for that park to be there, right? Because of Mother Nature, essentially. You know, the people in that particular community think that we are disenfranchising them because they live in you know, a smaller community, and yeah, that's what we're dealing with right now. So people get online and they want to complain about it, and they don't want to hear the common sense approach about it. They refuse to listen to it. They'd rather, you know, grumble about it.
Another shared thing for us was timing. We noticed, of course, as elected officials, that when elections approach, there's definitely an uptick of criticism of the city and of ourselves personally.
Good morning, everyone. Tim Hall, Garibaldi. One of the issues I wanted to bring up is that we have our city website, and there's one group called Garibaldi Memories that posts very exciting stories about our city. But there's a group that set up a Facebook page called Garibaldi Bulletin Board, and in that they use that particular that Facebook page to spread misinformation and false stories. And if anyone goes in and challenges that information, they find that they get blocked. So all of a sudden that the people that are the only ones that are agreeing with this misinformation are the ones that are seeing it and spreading that sharing it, I should say, to others in the town. So that's one of the things where I've got people saying, well, Tim, we should set up 4 or 5 Facebook pages. And I'm like, no, we're not going to do that.
That's tough.
So is there a way to deal with that at all?
So there are some best practices that we're going to talk about in the next section. The issue of blocking everyone who tries to correct the misinformation is a tricky one. I have some recommendations, though. Yes. Before we break for that, were there any other tables that wanted to? Yeah, in the front.
So we were talking about the concerns for the future, and one of them that came up was, you know, we're talking primarily Facebook platform here, but you know, I borrowed my son's phone this weekend to take a picture, and he's on another platform that I've never heard of. So that's the concern, is what platforms are we actually using? It kind of goes to what Mayor Witowski was talking about, not only the threads, but also what are the different platforms that are currently being used and how do we know about them?
Right. This is a problem for researchers as well. Once you publish your paper on Facebook, everyone's on TikTok all of a sudden. Other tables have anything they want to share?
We were talking about, I'm Tom Villalpando, sorry, Vale. One of the things that we talked about, what made information most difficult to fight, information that's coming from within. Right now, especially in election years, you get somebody that is on council or such that wants to make something out of nothing, and they go down to the hair salon or whatever. Next thing you know, you see it on Facebook, and people are jumping all over it. And instead of going and, like, you can say, go read the minutes from the last meeting. Will they go read minutes? No, but they're going to take everything that that counselor says, because the counselor was in the meeting, as being truth. The other thing on the misinformation that's difficult to fight is you get somebody like on TikTok. You get a 15-year-old influencer, and you're fighting a 15-year-old that has more outreach than you can possibly think of.
Yeah.
And so that's really hard to fight on situations like
Teenagers
that.
are scary.
It is, and it's really hard to fight the misinformation when it's coming from within.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a question that comes up a lot too, I think, is what if other elected officials are the ones spreading the misinformation?
Yeah, at our table, that was a
Yeah.
concern, was what our kids are also watching on TikTok is pretty scary. I find myself sometimes on it through Facebook, and I'm like, what did I just watch in the last 20 minutes, because it keeps rolling over. Another concern was the algorithms. There's no humanly way possible for our 1.5 communications to keep up with the algorithms.
Yeah.
And we're 14,000, and we have 9,400 followers on our Facebook page, which is pretty good. It's pretty robust.
That's a high percentage.
We actually do a really good job if you go to the City of St. Helens Facebook. But there's no way to keep up with that. So the future is not looking good. It's just not good. So that was our conversation here.
Yeah,
today,
a
so.
lot of people in this space are talking about the same thing. Just the sheer volume of information that gets posted to Facebook every single day is so overwhelming. You can't possibly deal with every single piece of it, right? So the conversations at the regulatory level are, can we make policy around the algorithms and things like that? Because it does start to feel like you're fighting a losing battle if you're just playing whack-a-mole with, different misinformation.
Yeah, Scott Rudder, City of Winston. We've got Winston 24/7, and this is just a constant litany of really interesting information. and I'm trying to talk the other counselors into not wrestling with that peg.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it does, all you do is just feed it. Just leave it alone. Any suggestions?
Yes. I will have some suggestions for, it can be hard to think about when to engage and when not to engage. So I'll have some slides of some best practices about that, how to think through that decision tree. And it's going to be for exactly the same reasons that we talked about in the first half, right? If you are just repeating something over and over, or you're solidifying something that someone, because of their identity, already wants to believe, you can end up making it worse. Or that's the concern.
I have a troll.
Does everybody have a personal troll in this room? Yeah. Okay.
Hold up.
So one of the things I do
Oh,
on social
that's-
media is I share education opportunities for people that have misconceptions or misinformation about people of color. And so I'll put an education piece out. There's something actually happened in real history, an education. There's a person in town that printed out every one of those. Every one. We're talking thousands. I mean, the packet was that thick. And they were giving them to businesses around town. This is our mayor. He hates white people. Seriously. And it's just education, right? Memorial Day, Juneteenth, just education. And so what I did was I went to the business owners. Did you know this person that works for you is doing this? He doesn't work there anymore because of that. But this person took it to the next level. I mean, the police called me and said, are you okay? Somebody's doing this. And I didn't know myself. So be careful, because people are doing things around in your world that behind your back, very subversive type stuff, and you don't even know it. So you gotta be careful when you put something on social media. And I just post education and funny things. I love cats fighting each other, but anyway, people watch what you do. I mean, I walked out of a liquor store one time. The mayor's an alcoholic, and he's not wearing a mask.
And,
It's
right?
very relatable content. But no, someone else made the comment that someone is trying to find out where she lives, like where her house is. So it is true that sometimes it can be lighthearted and sometimes it does escalate quickly into danger. Yeah. Yeah, so the comment is taking city councilors' addresses off the website. There's other tools you can use in Google and things like that to make it so your address doesn't come up, which I'm happy to share.
One of the issues we have, I've got multiple threat assessments going around different people in my city, trolls of mine. But one's going to burn my house down and knows my address, and the other's a former counselor who's spreading tons of misinformation. But the problem came when they started posting on Facebook pictures of staff members or volunteers in our fire department, and basically starting to say connect their bully complaints or their DPSST complaints related to particularly fire volunteers, saying that an autistic member of our fire department is unsafe to be on the fire department because they're, and so it kind of touched a chord with me. And I remember going through with legal about, well, I want to hide this comment, and if they were to comment on something related to the fire department, I have to leave it up.
Yeah.
You can't hide that, you can't delete it, or you could be, sued for that. However, regardless of your terms of use on your page. On the other side, though, she posted it on like a concert page, and so even though it was a picture of the person face circled at the concert providing EMT services, I was able to hide that because it was both malicious intent and it wasn't specific to the post itself. But one of the problems I've had with some of the trolls we've had is that they're getting a lot of information from that former counselor who is basically taking his treasure trove of public records emails and giving out partial points of it out. And one thing that's been, I would just encourage people to note is that the office of mayor is one of public trust. And so the level at which you go to is the level at which you bring your office to. Not just you, but your city council, your staff, everybody else. And there's some, power to the mayors that get into the weeds and brawl it out. But I will say that being able to be trusted, at least on my end, is been really helpful, that I don't engage in any political, like in terms of partisan politics. I just provide the information, I provide the rationales for what was done, but I don't defend those decisions other than say what the rationale was. And I let the dumpster fire go from there. And kudos to those who get on Nextdoor, Mayor Engelke, because holy cow, that is a dumpster fire.
Yeah, it is.
So, yeah.
And I think that's a great point when people want to know, should we have our own Facebook group for the city? A lot of these issues come up that then you're the moderator, right? Then there could be hate speech there, but you can't delete it because it's a public forum. Yeah. Other comments? Oh.
I wasn't going to say anything, but I have to. The one thing I think that we all have to remember about this is a very small minority of the people that do this. So if your city's 500 or 500,000, this is a very small minority.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think the name of the game, like a lot of people have been talking about with their trolls, is to just limit the impact of that one person so that other innocent people who are really trying to sort through all the information that they find online don't end up getting misled. Okay, any last comments? All right, so why don't we take a break about 15 minutes? So that'll put us about 10:25. Everyone can get a coffee, stretch your legs, and then I'll give you what you've all been asking for, which is best practices for how to fight this misinformation. Okay, let's get going for part 2 if people want to get settled. Maybe holler at people in the hallway. I want to make sure that we have enough time to do the same format. So yeah, if we close the door, we'll see if anyone gets nervous and comes in. Oh, some people are leaving, so. Okay, so we'll do the same format as last time. I will present to you some information, some research, and sort of what the best practices are considered to be for fighting misinformation. And then we'll have another chance to talk at our tables about if any of you have tried these strategies, or what kind of resources you have in your areas, or what your constraints are, and then we'll come back together for a final time and wrap up. So to get started thinking about the best ways to fight misinformation, I want to think about those same factors that were affecting our behavioral biases and causing the spread of misinformation. The first thing is, maybe the first good news that I have for you, is that in terms of credibility, you are well positioned. So information from sources that are perceived to be credible typically create stronger beliefs and are more persuasive. Credibility can matter a lot of times depending on the group or the context more than expertise. So I could say, I'm an economist, I'm going to tell you where to invest your money, but for a lot of people, they're going to believe that information more if it comes from somebody that they trust. Just like with local news, Americans tend to have higher level of trust in their local officials than their state or federal elected officials. So I guess if you think it's bad for you, it could be worse. But this is good. This is an advantage that you have as mayors, just like local news, to take advantage of the fact that you're a part of the community and you're seen by the community and people have higher levels of trust in you. We will also talk some about tailoring the message to the audience and what messenger you want to use. So there's been some discussion about if you have someone responding to things in a Facebook group, who is it? Is it your city council members? Is it other trusted members of different groups within your community? So think about who has that kind of credibility. It could be experts depending on the topic and depending on the audience that you're trying to reach, or it could not be experts. It could be members of the group that you're trying to target. Another thing that's come up, I heard a bunch in the discussions from before the break, is that one way of discrediting information is to go at the credibility of the source. Right? So if you are able to say, and we'll talk about this some more, why this person is misleading, and reduce that credibility in the information, that can be helpful. We also want to think about information being sticky, right? So we talked about how if you hear something over and over again, you tend to believe it's true. That makes people worried about fact-checking or debunking things because you have to say that thing again in order to do the fact-checking. You have to make another post about it, or you have to bring it up in your meeting or in your newsletter. And so people often wonder if it's worth it to do the debunking. The evidence shows that fact-checking can reduce people's beliefs in false information. So it does work. It can work if it's done correctly, and you shouldn't shy away from trying to correct misinformation when you feel like you need to do that. But we mentioned this in the first part, even if misinformation has been corrected, it can continue to affect people's thinking. So even if you learn that something is not true, in another context, it still affects how you feel. There's something called the backfire effect, and this was from a famous paper from the 80s, where people read a news headline that says, Bob Talbert is not linked with the mafia. So that is a true statement, but even though people agreed and could later answer correctly that Bob Talbert is not linked to the mafia, they still had more negative impressions of Bob Talbert. Right? Even though they know he's not a mafia guy, maybe there's some truth there. Exactly, that's the question that comes up. I'm not sure how this relates to calling yourself the mayor's mafia. Maybe that's getting out in front of the story ahead of time. So it can be affected. Yeah, print out the T-shirts, just own it. I get if you are in the mafia, then maybe that's the strategy.
That kind of sounds like a sticky headline that might get somebody to read your stuff, though.
That's true. So I mean, you would click on that, right?
Right,
Yeah. So this is exactly what we want to talk about. How do you make the debunking sticky and concise and something that people want to click on and share and repeat, but sort of not trigger any of these backfire effects where you're making the misinformation worse. Okay. So there are two different ways of fighting misinformation, and both of them have already come up. One of them is called pre-bunking, or inoculation against misinformation. So this is trying to get out ahead of things and helping people understand sources of misinformation, having clear, open communications channels, and trying to sort of prevent the misinformation from sticking in the first place. And then if you can't do that, sometimes you don't know who's gonna lose their minds on Facebook about whatever random thing, then you, if you have to, proceed with the debunking. Okay, so first, prevent misinformation from sticking if you can. Explaining misleading or manipulative argumentation strategies to people. So when you're doing the debunking, it is helpful to say why this person is spreading the misinformation, right? Not just that this thing is not true, but why someone would want you to believe it. Is it in their interest? Are they backed by somebody? Or even, you know, it might be natural to think this because you're worried about this. It could be there's a kernel of truth in the misinformation and you want to acknowledge that. But explaining why it's misinformation can help inoculate people in the future when they see something similar come up. There's also a lot of research about how it can be effective to encourage people to best practices, thinking critically about all of the information they read on social media, considering the source of the information, evaluating all claims by checking them against other sources. So this is a really important thing to encourage people to do if they see something on social media, to try to cross-check it with different news platforms. See if it's reported anywhere else before you share it. Kind of trying to train people in how to navigate the media environment. There are some interventions in schools where people have come up with like video games where you try to be a spreader of misinformation. And so you think about, oh, like what would I say? What language would I use? What reasoning would I use if I really wanted this misinformation to catch on? And then that helps people think about strategies for misinformation and think about, be more inoculated to seeing it in the future. We also want to make sure, so this says simple, consistent reminders to follow these steps help lead to a more discerning use of social media. Simple is important and consistent is important as well. It's important to be frequently talking about this, not just coming in once when something blows up, but sort of as much as you can, or as much as the schools in your area can, or as much as the news outlets in your area can, try to start getting into people's mind the best practices for not being tricked into believing misinformation. This also came up a lot before the break. Something that's really effective is to be active communicators. So if you can present reliable, factually correct information before false information is spread, that is the best. That gives you the opportunity to frame the message, to frame the agenda and how people are thinking about it. And the first information tends to be the stickiest. So if you sense that something is going to blow up, or maybe there's something that you know people are going to start to complain about, if you can be quick and concise with the truth, put it in the terms that you want it framed in, that's a lot more effective. As soon as you start responding to misinformation, you are necessarily on the spreader of misinformation's turf, right? Suddenly I'm talking about whether I'm in the mafia or not. I did not want to be in that conversation, right? It's better if I can just get out there to start that I'm a law-abiding citizen. Yes?
So on the pre-debunk aspect, what I found is you put it out there and you just leave it alone. Comments will be
Yeah.
It happens all the time.
So you put something true, and then in the comments section, it just completely devolves.
On a completely different post that somebody decided to try to make up their own to what's going on, is somebody actually will find that your message is what I found with the pre-debunked and grab it and actually not have to correct that.
Oh, so other people are helping you by once the correct information is out there. Oh, okay. Yes. So yeah. So that is a fantastic, and I think I have some bullet points about that coming next. That if you can get people to have that sort of, if you see something, say something mentality, like, oh, if I see something in the Facebook comments that I know is not true, I know where the right information is and I can post it, that is super helpful. So to have that information, exactly like you're saying, available, clear, concise, somewhere that they can find it, can help people in the community fight misinformation as well. I think that's on my next slide. Absolutely. So I know some of you come from different sized communities, you have different budgets, maybe you can have a staff person who works on social media, maybe you can't. And that is for sure a constraint. Just the amount of time, like we've been talking about, that it takes to keep track of what's on Nextdoor, what's in the 12 different Facebook groups, can be really time consuming. Other effective methods are sending out emails, texts, websites. So I put up an example. I don't know if you can see this. This is from Eugene. It's a lot of cities have some kind of website like this these days, or page on their website that's called City News. So here, if you're living in a place where there's limited local news, you can kind of try to fill the role of that local editor, right? You can put a place where there are stories about, here there's fireworks, there is something about a park, something about the pool and the fitness center, right? You can be a place where that information is available. Eugene is not a news desert, right? But it's still, if, like we were talking about, local news is not covering the stories that you want to have covered, you can put that information out there. So, question? How do you get the local papers? So at the break, I was talking to the mayor of Cave Junction, and she said that she writes a letter in her local newspaper every week, just talking about whatever topic she wants to bring up that week, which I thought was a great idea. Doesn't cost you any money. The local paper probably wants content. Otherwise, I think to the extent that you can try, I mean, I was going to say have relationships with the editors and the local reporters is great. Some of them are obviously not local. We talked about that, the consolidation of news media. But if you can get to know the editors of your local papers, if you can get to know the moderators of those Facebook groups, even if you can have coffee with that person, maybe not the ones that are dedicated to trolling you, but some of the other ones, you can think about those people as these are like the editors of your local paper, kind of, right? These are, if there's a Facebook group for your city, this person, whoever's moderating that Facebook group, is deciding what news about your community people are going to see. So as much as you or your staff can like meet those people, have coffee with them, I recommend that. Yeah.
But when the moderators are trolls.
When the moderators are trolls, I would not have coffee with them.
That's why I chuckle.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, this is a context-dependent suggestion. Absolutely. Okay, so this is what just came up. So if you do have a website or a Facebook page where you are posting factual information, either right away when it comes up or you're trying to debunk something, it helps if you have people who can amplify your message. So you, as the mayor, depending on your circumstances, you may or may not want to be in the Facebook comments. You might not want to be on Nextdoor. It is a scary place. But if you know people in the community, so this also came up as an example in the earlier discussions, if you have city council members or you have friends who can take that information that you've posted on your website, on your Facebook page, and they can go and put it in those comment sections, that can be very effective. Every community has influential members who are trusted by the public. So you know best in your context who's the group that you're trying to reach and who is a representative of that group. Have a consistent and reliable voice. And I also put on here, admit to mistakes when they're made. I think that's super important for maintaining your credibility. If you sent out something that had a mistake on it, or you erred in some way, you didn't give people information that they needed, be absolutely clear about that. That is critical to being considered a trusted source of information. And proofread. Yeah, always. Okay, so this is a question that came up a lot. How do I know when to try to debunk something versus leave it alone? So if there's misinformation out there that's largely unknown, right? Maybe there's just one post on Facebook that somebody saw that's not getting a lot of attention, or one post on Nextdoor, I would say leave it alone. You don't want to risk the backlash of bringing that into the conversation by trying to debunk it. You don't want to raise the familiarity. You don't want to bring it to people's minds. If it's not bothering anyone, or if it's obviously ridiculous, you can let it be. Exactly. Don't fan the flames. If the myth is starting to get out there, but it's just a little bit, and if you can, you should try to take the opportunity to frame the agenda yourself, right? Put it, like we were saying, put it in the context that you want, not in the context of responding to misinformation, but just saying, here's what is true, right? And try to get that message out as quickly as you can. If the myth has already spread and there's already a frame out there, so I'm already talking about whether or not I'm in the mafia, that's just the conversation that's being had. Now you're in the world where you have to debunk it, right? And in that case, I would say don't hesitate, don't worry about fact checking and having a backlash effect at this point. There is some evidence that can happen, but fact checking can still be really accurate. So if there's something that's going viral, you definitely want to address it. Okay. So this is what we call a truth sandwich. I will also, some people were asking, I'll put these slides up onto the conference app afterwards, so if you want to have a copy of this, you can. This is the best practice if you have to debunk some misinformation of how to do it. And I'll go through each one of these 4 things in turn. But the first is lead with the fact if you can. So you start out, I see a lot of some of the examples that we'll look at of city websites start out and they say, here's a myth. Here's some misinformation I want to correct. Sometimes you have to do that. Sometimes it's so ludicrous and the frame is already out there, you have to just say, look, this isn't true. But if you can, it's better to start out by saying the truth. Say it in a concise, simple way. And again, that can be hard because the truth can be more complicated than the lie. But if you can just say a fact, clear, pithy, and sticky, make it simple and plausible, and use your own framing, how you want that issue to be thought about, do that first. Okay, then next, tell them that a myth is coming and just say it one time, right? We're not overly worried about raising the familiarity of the myth at this point, but let's not do it if we don't have to, right? So tell them that there's a myth out there, say what the myth is once. If you can, explain the fallacy. Why is this myth misleading them? So this is where if the credibility of the source is in question, you can talk about that. If there's some kind of other logical fallacy in play, you can talk about that. And then you say the fact again, right? We're repeating the fact over and over. We're making that the familiar part. We're making that what's sticking in people's mind. We say the fact more often than we say the misleading misinformation.
How would you start that? So the actual event or the actual or in reality, I mean, how would you start that statement? So I use in reality, or if you read the minutes of, you'll see the actual what happened. But what would be a good way to let them know the real information is coming?
So I would just say, so we'll go through each one of these first, but I would say, the city council the city had to close this park because of flooding. That is true, right? We are committed to having accessible parks across the city. There is a rumor out there that we closed it because of what neighborhood it was in. That is not true. And then again, something about the flooding, right? So as much as you can, just say the true thing first. The city closed the park because of flooding is short, it's concise, it can stay in people's mind. I have elevating trusted local voices here. Again, this is going to be context dependent, depending on where your community and depending on what kind of misinformation you're trying to combat. So it could be a context where you want to elevate the voice of local public health authorities, right? That's who people are going to believe. It could be a context where you do not want to do that because those people are not credible with the group that you're trying to reach out to. In that case, it might be a better idea to find a member of the community or the group whose identity is involved in this misinformation. If possible, do not rely on a simple retraction. So don't just say this isn't true, right? Don't just say this is a lie about the city council. And try to make it not more complicated than the original misinformation. You might have to expand on it later, but if you can say it in one short sentence first, right, that's going to make it stay in people's minds better. All ballots are going to be counted, right? No, I have an example coming up about the one of the COVID examples. Okay, when you get to the myth, we don't want to spend a lot of time on this. Repeat it only once directly to avoid any potential backfire effects. And corrections are more successful if people are suspicious of the source or the intent of the misinformation. So if you can say something like, this is, I would be careful not to get too political, right? But if there's a reason some particular interest would like people to believe this, and you can get at the credibility of that person, that can be effective. Obviously, you don't want to look like you're just, fighting it out. But if there's a reason, if it's disinformation, you can talk about why people are suspicious of the source. Even if it's not disinformation, so even if it's something innocent, like, oh, I thought that school bus article applied to me, you can still point out why the misinformation is wrong. So pair the misinformation with why it's wrong, clearly. Explain why the mistaken information was thought to be correct in the first place. So this could be, people believed this because they were already worried about this thing. It could be people believe this because there's a kernel of truth in it, right? It is true that sometimes government mishandles your personal information, and that's why people believed this. It is true that sometimes kids with special needs don't have sufficient resources, and that's why people believed this, right? If you can think about why people thought it was true, why it's now clear that it's wrong, and why the alternative is correct, right? So you could point to the city council minutes, you have some evidence to show what happened, you have your pay stub as the mayor or the budget or whatever, you can show that this information is not true. For your $46. And if possible, so even when we're debunking, we're still kind of trying to inoculate people against future misinformation. If possible, you can talk about the logical fallacy underlying the misinformation. So cherry picking data, right? This is misinformation because it's only looking at one part of the story and not the whole thing. So that helps people to understand in the future, oh, if I see something that seems sketchy, maybe it's true, but maybe it's just cherry picking, and I should be encouraged to look to other sources and try to cross-check that information. Okay, and then at the end, we say the truth again. Restate the fact part of it again. This is the first thing people hear, and this is the last thing that you leave them with in their minds. Also, unfortunately, the effects of debunking misinformation do tend to wear off over time. So if you correct somebody about something and then you ask them about that thing, they can correctly answer the question. If some time goes by, it starts to wear off. So it's best to be consistent and do it repeatedly if you have to, right? Just clearly say what the facts are and be prepared to do it over and over and over again. We want to remember what's causing these behavioral biases in the first place. So the efficacy of corrections depends in part on how much the recipient is willing to believe the statement. So you want to think about whether activating that group identity is going to help you or hurt you, right? It depends on the source of the misperception. It is always important to avoid stigmatizing groups for holding inaccurate beliefs. That can be more polarizing. If you are saying everyone's believing this misinformation about me because they're from the opposite party and they're a bunch of dummies, all you're going to do is make them want to believe it more, right? Maybe it is true, maybe they are a bunch of dummies, but that is not going to be a helpful frame. Right? You want to focus not on saying you believe this misinformation because you're bad or you have bad intent, but focus on debunking the idea, not the group of people who hold it, but what's wrong with the idea. Okay, and then, so this has come up several times. What about debunking on social media? So there are studies, I mentioned this before, that show that people actually do care about accuracy when they're thinking about it. So there was a study where they showed people a news headline, like an article that was obviously pretty ridiculous, but very partisan, right? And asked people, do you think this is true? And they said no. Like almost everyone said no, this seems a bit much. And then they asked people, do you want to share it on Facebook? And everyone said no. Right? This is not true. I don't want to share it on Facebook. That's fine. Then another part of the experiment, they showed people that same article and just said, do you want to share it on Facebook? And a lot of them said yes. Because the part of our brain that wants that social interaction and that, dopamine hit from getting all the likes is different from the logical part of the brain. So you want to turn on that logical part that cares about accuracy just by mentioning it to people. Just asking people if this seems true made them less likely to share it. So you can write something like, most people want to receive accurate information, right? I know you're an honest person, you want to post things that are true, here's some accurate information. That's going to trigger that right kind of thinking where people remember that they care about accuracy. This also came up in response to a question. So if you can mobilize other social media users to respond quickly to information by sharing facts, that's great. You provide the information, and then to the extent that there are people, and the more you can train them to do this, the better. If they see misinformation, they can, they have a resource, they know that they're empowered to share it. That can be very helpful. So this is in response to thinking about whether to reply to a troll, right? Trolls are, so this just means somebody who is just putting up a bunch of nonsense trying to get attention, right? It can be effective to respond to that person once with factual information, because seeing someone else on social media being corrected can make other people have more accurate beliefs, right? So even though the troll knows that it's nonsense, if other people see the true information, that can help them. A lot of other people are seeing that message. I would not then continue to get into it with the troll, but if it's possible to reply one time, nice, concise, right? Here's a link to the fact sheet that's on my website. Then you look responsive. Then it looks like you do have an answer for them. And anyone else who's reading that thread, right, they might not be responding, they might not be clicking on it, but they also have a link to the right information. So thinking about strategies for doing this, I think, so this is a City of Glendale rumors page, was one of the first cities to put up a page specifically about debunking misinformation. And I've seen more and more of these over time. So this is just a page on the city website where there are certain myths going around and then responses to them. California. I have another one, so this is going to be too small for you to read. Nevada County, California has a page called Correcting Misinformation. One of the myths is the county refuses to release video from the Board of Supervisors January 2022 workshop. That is not true. The second one is myth. Nevada County is tracking children through contact tracing. And then it goes on to explain why that's not true. If you keep scrolling down, now I wish that I had put this up, but one of them is the myth that the local officials are making high salaries that are out of line with the average. It debunks that as well. Okay, so this is one option. I looked at a bunch of these and tried to find someone who was doing their myth corrections in a truth sandwich, and I did not find too many. So I took this Nevada County example, and I showed what it would look like if you actually, so I picked the myth about contact tracing of children. What it would look like, ooh, my bullet points are out of order. I'll fix that when I upload the slide. What it would look like if you did it in a truth sandwich. So the first one up here, this should be the fact, right? The fact is, instead of saying myth, we're tracking children, I would just say fact, contact tracing does not involve tracking anyone. I just copied this language from their website. Tracing involves a voluntary interview with a COVID positive adult, so not children, to determine who they may have been in contact with, when they were infected, and call those people and let them know. Okay, and the second one should say, warn about the myth. Then you can just say, simple and short, a myth is circulating that claims we are tracking children. Explain the fallacy. So look, this is scary. We're in a pandemic. There's something called contact tracing where I'm supposed to like tell the government what I'm doing if I got sick. So I wrote, without knowing the details of how contact tracing works, it might be understandable to think we are keeping that data. However, Rapid Trace staff have no ongoing access to contact tracing data. And then we repeat the fact again. We therefore cannot track people through contact tracing. This I copied from their website because I thought it was funny. We have no ability or desire to track anybody. So, I mean, like, I don't know what kind of resources you think we have to put cameras outside of everyone's house. Okay, so fact, warn about the myth, explain the fallacy, and then the fact again. Okay. So I think it's a little after 11. Let's have another discussion at your tables because I am particularly interested to know what tactics you have used to fight misinformation. Some of these have come up already. Are you using websites? If you're from a smaller community and you don't have a website, what do? Calling me and coming to have coffee has come up. Writing a letter to the editor of the paper once a week has come up. What things are you using? What resources did you use? What other resources do you wish you could use if you had more time and budget? Also, can you think about any credible sources of information in your community who are trusted, who could help you with these tasks? Or does anyone have examples? Like, having your friends go into Nextdoor for you. And then extra credit is for one of the pieces of misinformation you talked about in the first discussion, can you try to make a truth sandwich? Fact, myth, and then fact again, that you could use in trying to debunk that. Okay, so let's maybe talk for 20 minutes and then we will come back and hear what the groups had to say. We can think about coming back together now. That would be great. I'm feeling the pressure of the food having arrived. So I know. Suddenly the interest in my talking plummets. But I wanted to give everybody a chance, in particular, to share if your group had any examples of things that worked, either pre-bunking or debunking misinformation, or did you learn from each other any new ways of fighting misinformation? Yes. Does somebody want to?
Oh, this isn't that small room. You can hear me. Mike Myers, Mayor Jefferson.
Just a second. We're going to grab the mic.
Oh, that you're gonna record.
For posterity.
I was trying to do a John McCardle. He's got a much bigger voice, but you're better looking. I'll take that. Mike Myers, Mayor of Jefferson. Two things we do in the pre-bunking, if you will, and we were doing one of them before I ever heard the word pre-bunking, or yeah, get my syllables all corrected. In our newsletter, we project out what we're looking at doing as a council or as a city 3 to 6 months, even a year down the road, and bring them up to speed in terms of why we're looking at these things, and then requesting input back on whatever subject it may be that we're looking at in terms of development. The second thing is, and I'm in a smaller community, we have a traffic light, but I go to Derek's barbershop. Derek's a big fisherman in there. He's well known in the valley. He gets lots and lots of customers, and I just go in a couple times a month, kick back. I don't get a haircut, obviously. But as we talk, he'll say, hey, I heard this, or I was wondering what's going on with that. And I give him all the info I can, and those are questions that have been posed to him because they know I stop in there. And that seems to help quite a bit in terms of communication throughout. Lastly, what I do is I show up at a lot of the community sport events and just walk around meeting parents and so forth. And a lot of the things that do pop up, the response back is from others saying, well, I talked to the mayor about that, and this is it. So unless something comes out of left field, we've been fairly calm for the last couple of years. Can't say the same about our school district, but we're doing okay.
Excellent. I love the barbershop idea. I want to steal it and write a paper about it.
Anyone else?
Hello, Sam Stidell, Mayor Cannon Beach. My wife is a hairdresser, so I get it in person. My family's pretty much all educators, and I grew up knowing that a narrative is another way to influence thinking. We recently had a land use issue that went into an appeal, very challenging. The permits had already been prescribed and all that kind of stuff. So as you know, housing is one of the big issues and all that kind of stuff. I chose to created a memo that I put out on our website where I did an allegory. I wrote a story about some kids playing Monopoly and how halfway through the game, the young guy who was losing wanted to change the rules so that they couldn't build their houses anymore. And I posted it, had absolutely no relation directly to the issue at hand, but everybody knew. Everybody has contacted me back saying, not everybody, but a huge response from this allegory about something totally different, but they all got it. So that's another tool in the box, is try a narrative, try something different.
Thanks, Sam.
One thing our city did, I've learned that being proactive is a lot cheaper than being reactive. There's a company out there, and I think I brought this up at OMA meeting here a few months ago, we got a hold of, it's called Bang the Table. And they make a social media page for cities. and you design how you want it to work. And ours is called Malala Current. And when we started using that page, we put everything on there from the building of our sewage treatment plant to the police station to our park CPC to how you can run for council, what it takes to apply to be a police officer. The list goes on. And as time has gone on, and I mean, there's a plethora of services that are also on it, from emergency text alerts that the city controls to instant messaging on when there's new information put up onto each of those pages. So people don't have to keep looking back and seeing, no, there's nothing new, and then they get burned out and quit looking. So what they do is they click a little icon and they get an email when new information comes up. So it keeps them involved when there is something new. And since we started that page, and we've, people have put up misinformation, say on Facebook, it's like, hey, take your question and put it on. There's a Q&A section where someone can ask any question they want, and one of our city staff the appropriate city staff responds to that question. So they're getting factual information from a city staff member who knows what's going on. It's not just social media and someone plugging in what they think is the right thing. And I've been very, very, I'm big on Facebook. And so when somebody's putting up misinformation, I'll get on there. Hey, have you taken this to Malala Current? Have you gotten the factual information? And the misinformation about our cities died down a lot. If anybody, I have a bunch of cards with me. I have a QR code for Malala Current on the back of my business card. If you guys want to take a look at it and just scan it, I'll give you guys a card. And that way you guys can look at it and see maybe how it would implement and work well in your city.
Mayor, what was the name of your company?
Bang the Table.
Bang the Table.
So one of the things that I do on purpose, I work for myself as an insurance broker, so I make my own day, my calendar. So we had some issues with street projects. We're ripping up a road, putting the road back, and it's taking longer and longer to fix those roads. And so what I do is somebody comes on Nextdoor or the city's website or the social media page, I will say, you know what, I'm gonna be in your neighborhood this afternoon at 3 or 4 or 5. I'd like to walk with you and you can tell me the issues in your neighborhood. And a lot of times, one person was upset about Hill Street, 1.5 miles of road, being replaced, and it was taking longer. And I would ask the question, do you know how sewer pipes work, how water pipes work? I said, so we have 19 miles, at that time, 19 miles of 4 or 5 sewer pipe underneath our city. One is best, 4 or 5, you better replace it or you're gonna have a sinkhole, which can cause lives. And so I said, would you rather we rip the road up and put it back real fast, or go down and check the pipes to make sure that we don't have to rip up this road a year from now? And once I explained it to them, I mean, literally 30 people were walking with me down this neighborhood, and they were like, we didn't know that. So I sent them a report from Public Works that shows where our bad pipes are, and that street was one of the streets that needed that work. We've done a better job since then of getting that information out. And a perfect example of that I love is that I work with seniors. I have 900 Medicare clients in the city of Albany alone. But one day I got a complaint about stray cats, feral cats. Who has feral cat problems? Right? But what I found out was I went to the neighborhood at noon. I didn't see any cats. Went to the neighborhood at 6 o'clock that evening. I saw cats. So I got out and I followed them. Walked about 6 blocks. They turned right, I turned right. They turned left, I turned left. And there was a woman in that neighborhood putting out bowls of food for the cats. And so the people that complained to me, I went to their house and I knocked on their door. I said, you don't have a feral cat problem. You have a lonely neighbor problem. So I walked those group of people over to her house and they made introductions. Their cats are gone now. So that's how you debunk a lot of this stuff too.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to pony off of the previous comment about what I would also encourage would put in your budget communications. Even the smaller cities, I would continue to put that in your budget. We have 1.5 time, and they do actually meet with all department heads. They put out like sewer work that's being done. We just had to raise our water bills $7 And we're gonna have to do it for the next 5 years because our last sewer master plan update was 1989. But it works very, very well. It's vitally important. This is not gonna get any better. And it's not about us. These people actually build your city, the communications that you are leaving a legacy for the next guy to come too. It's very, very vitally important. Yeah, I can get out the message. I'm pretty well trusted. But when I'm gone, who's coming in next? That communications person has built those relationships with our neighboring partners, school districts, ports, all that. It's a very vitally important position. Even if you had to like transition it, our halftime is actually a full-time because we're 1.5 time communication, works at the library. So maybe that's how you work it in. A quarter, of library, or a quarter of communications, and then 3/4 library. But it works pretty well.
And if you're a smaller city and you don't have that budget, I would agree with you. We actually reached out to the RARE volunteer program. And we currently have a RARE volunteer working with us, for us now, on our downtown revitalization. But they are tremendous, and they're eager and enthusiastic. Great resource as well. One thing that I do is we have a Facebook community page, and it started with the Chamber of Commerce, and now we have 6 admins on the page. They wanted to make me an admin, and I said, no way in hell do I want to be an admin, because I would want to delete everybody or delete the comments, and I don't want to put all of that in writing. So I said, just make me a moderator. Well, I don't have time to look at Facebook all day long, and some of these people are, they do. They look at it. That's their job. That's what they do. They have my cell phone number, and if they see something on the Facebook page that I need to address, they text me, hey, go check this out. We also have a police officer in town who's on the Facebook page as well, but she has an alias, so she can also monitor, if there's any nefarious thing going on. So it's again knowing your partners and making sure that you're communicating with your partners. If you have social media in your communities. Anyone else?
Oh, thank you, Terry. I'm Julie Fitzgerald, Mayor of Wilsonville, and to the last comment about leaving something behind for the next guy or woman. For many years, the city of Wilsonville has had a 4-color newsletter, and it's large format, and now it's probably 6 or 8 pages. And so I inherited that, already had a good following, and it has traditionally had a column from the mayor on the upper right of the front page. And I hear comments from people, so almost every time I meet somebody, they've read that. We have done surveys that has a very high readership and much higher than the local paper. I don't know how many years it's been going, but we really do benefit from it. And one way that you can increase readership is we have all kinds of news about what's happening in the city, and certainly a lot of people never read it, but you hope the few that do spread the word. But, so for example, doing a story about the robotics team or somebody who, placed in some school function in the debate team, various things like that, then they'll show it to all their friends. Did you see this article about our daughter in the paper? So that kind of helps cross-pollinate, and we find that to be a really good way to get ahead of things and give them valuable information about things they want to hear about.
You can get quarterly reports from these people because they are putting out your message, and it's vitally important that they can present to the whole council. They're not just working, they're working for the entire city. This is our message. So, because it can be touch and go. So you have to have that right person.
One thing I think we're missing, Brian, from the 2nd largest Dallas in the world. One thing I think we're missing is laughter and humor. You'll note that these people are deadly serious in most cases. We're seeing less and less of humorousness and irony and satire and that sort of thing. And people pay a lot of attention to that. I was in the Army for 21 years, a good experience. And if it weren't for the humor, we wouldn't have the U.S. Army, believe me. It would be too awful. So humor.
Yeah, I agree. And that I think there was an example of that earlier. That can be a good way to diffuse a source who's just obviously trolling. Making your t-shirts.
Any other burning comments?
This always happens at the end of class, too. You don't want to be the person keeping people from their food. Okay, so I'll just wrap up with key takeaways from everything we talked about today. The first is that there can be an information vacuum at local levels, and to the extent that you can, try to fill that with accurate, consistent information. So if you can pre-bunk misinformation, do that. Second is to remember that people share and believe misinformation, sometimes not because it's accurate, but because of their group identities. Another comment that came up at one of the tables that we chatted about at the break is that we, at the same time we're seeing a rise in social media, are seeing a decline in a lot of our other civic institutions. So people are meeting each other a lot less in real life. That could be partly due to polarization, but it can also feed into that polarization. You're more likely to go after someone if you haven't spoken to them and spent time with them in person. So be aware when you're debunking to go after the idea, not the person, and try to have an understanding of why that misinformation seemed true to that group. And then just remember that information is sticky. Debunk using a truth sandwich. So you say the truth and then quickly say the myth and then emphasize the truth again. So that's what stays in people's mind. It can be effective. It doesn't last forever. So to do it consistently and repeatedly is the best practice. Okay. Any final questions before we wrap up and I let you eat? Okay. So my email address, I think is in the app. I will upload these slides to the app as well. And I'll also stick around if anybody wants to chat, but thank you so much for having me. I really appreciated this opportunity.
Thank you, Professor Schroeder, for taking the time to join us today. So please grab your lunch back there, and after lunch you're either probably signed up for breakout sessions or a tour. Be on the back of your badges if you're signed up for a tour. And then we have the keynote speaker and opening ceremonies at 3, and 4:30 is a welcome reception. And hope you guys enjoy your conference. Thank you.